Welcome back to the Think Bigger Real Estate Show. I am your host, Justin Stoddart, and today I want to stop you before you think you know what this is about. It's about real estate investing, and you might be thinking in your mind, I know I need to have 25% saved up. You don't. Today's expert is going to teach us all about seller financing. Yes, even in this market, teach us about how to get into seller financing conversations, off-market acquisitions. We're going to teach you how to be an investor much sooner than you thought you could. Before I fully introduce today's guest, let me remind you that inside of the Think Bigger Real Estate group on Facebook, we're going to engage you in the conversation. What questions do you have? How can we help you get started on this topic? So please join us over there if you're not yet a member. Back to today's guest. His name is Jeff Stevens. He is the real estate entrepreneur. He's somebody who not only talks the talk, but he walks the walk. He has a podcast called Racking Up Rentals, and somebody that you definitely want to know when it comes to getting into the real estate investment space and accelerating that pace. Jeff Stevens, thanks for coming on the show today.
Well, thanks for the invitation. I appreciate it.
Yeah, I really became a fan of yours when I got on your email list. So for any of you that are out there looking for great content around real estate investing, whether it's for you and or for your clients, Jeff, let's just jump to that really quickly. Go to the podcast, Racking Up Rentals.
Yeah.
What's the best way to get them on your email list so they can start to get this great content that you put out?
Yeah, thank you. Actually, probably the best way would be to download like a free guide that I have. So if you go to rentalwealthguide.com, there's a pretty thorough PDF there called the step-by-step guide to buying your next or your first rental property off market with seller financing without needing to go to a bank and ask for a loan, that kind of thing. So it explains that in great detail, and that will add you as well.
I love it. I love it. And folks, I'm not saying this because Jeff asked me to. I actually told him as we got started, I said, Jeff, I love your emails. I try and read every one that I can. He's masterful. You can tell that you, Jeff, have really mastered what you do, but the way you deliver it in your emails is very thoughtful. And in addition to that, he's been highlighted. I know, Jeff, you've been highlighted on Think Bigger. Sorry, not Think Bigger. Yes, as well, but on Bigger Pockets, right? So you're kind of starting to create a little bit of a national splash for yourself and kind of really becoming owner financing, expertise or the expert in that space. So let's dive into this, Jeff. I know a lot of people out there, again, have had this paradigm of like, okay, I need to save up. If I'm going to buy a $400,000 rental, I need to have $100,000 set aside to be able to do this. And you're coming in saying, nah, not so fast. You can do it much sooner than that. Talk us through kind of how you're doing that and what people need to know to get started.
Yeah, absolutely. So my whole approach and what I like to advocate for is what I would call relationship-based negotiation. And it's not to say that you don't need actual US dollars to do your real estate investing, but it does mean that if you take the right approach and you're focusing on the people as much as on the real estate, then you can find yourself with opportunities to buy properties that you don't have to follow the traditional route exactly on. And one of the ways that could be good, there's lots of ways that could be really good, but one of the ways is that it might result in a smaller down payment, which is a really nice thing. And even if it doesn't result in a smaller down payment, almost certainly it will result in a simpler, less arduous, less painful underwriting process and kind of loan approval process and things like that. So I love it for lots of reasons, but the lower down payment, which is fairly typical, is one of those reasons.
When you think about how properties have appreciated here over the past period of time, wouldn't people have wanted to have two rental properties instead of one, two for the price of one? Right?
Mm-hmm.
Think about lowering the down payment. Like, that's super interesting to people because you realize that if it made a lot of sense to have one, boy, I would have loved to have had two. I think we're all probably feeling that right now.
Yeah, absolutely. You can make those dollars go a lot further in your portfolio.
Yeah. So this relationship based concept, right? It sounds like maybe you're not spamming the world, right? You're not sending out thousands and thousands of letters hoping that somebody bites. Maybe you have that in your strategy, but talk to us about this relationship based. Well, like when I hear relationship, I don't hear mass mailing. Now, correct me if I'm wrong, but like, what is the strategy that you take?
Yeah, so it's interesting. We do use mail. I would not say it's mass per se exactly, but even the content of the mail has a different goal. So let me kind of start at the end and just kind of work backwards from there. The situation that I know I want to find myself in is I'm sitting on someone's couch in their living room, having a conversation about potentially buying their real estate. There's nobody else in the living room. There's nobody who's coming 30 minutes later for their appointment. There's no sign out front. There's no hand that's been raised that says, hey, we're looking to sell our property. There's no expression of a particular price. It's just two people having a conversation. And so I call that a negotiation dynamic. I like that negotiation dynamic much better. It suits me and my personality and my strengths much better than, write up your offer, submit it, put your best foot forward, the highest and best, that kind of thing. So I work backwards from that. I say, well, how can I find myself sitting on as many couches as possible? So if I back up from there, I say, well, I think in that case, then I need to reach out to people who will perceive me as a peer. Okay, so now how can I reach out to them in a way that they will perceive me as a peer? If I send them a nice letter that says, hi, I'm Jeff. I'm also a local landlord. I'd like to buy another property. I saw you own this one. Would you be ever willing to entertain that conversation with me? If so, give me a call then. If now's not the right time, that's fine. Just hold on to the letter. That's effectively what it will say in a letter. So it's probably as important to note what's not in that letter, right? It's not saying I want to buy this property now. I want to buy it as is. I want to close fast. I've got cash. I don't need financing contingencies. It doesn't say anything like that. It's just like, hi, I'm a normal person. You're a normal person. Is there any chance we could talk about me buying your real estate someday? And so we do use the medium of letter. So it's mass mailing in the sense that it's paper and stamps and stuff, and it shows up in their mailbox by a postal employee. But beside that, it's really quite different. Yeah. So we send it to people. I'll say this is like the last little component. If the conversation we want to have at the end, sitting in that living room, ultimately leads to a seller financing conversation, as we back up, we say, well, who are the people who are most likely to be the candidates to have that kind of conversation with? And the answer is very simply people who might someday be able to use an installment sale as a method of deferring capital gains. I'd say that's, of the three main things I find, like that's the number one driver. They want to sell their property. They want to be done. They don't really feel super excited about paying capital gains tax, but because they're ready to be done, they don't just want to do a 1031 exchange. They're looking for something that scratches all those itches. So we will mail to people who have some of those likely attributes.
Really interesting conversation, Jeff. You don't know this yet, but the book that I authored called The Upstream Model, what site is it on? There we go. Yeah. Teaches very similar principles. The concept of the book is that at some point in our marketplace right now, there are people that are going to need you in the future. And how do you find them? And I teach the model of going in and actually having a very specific networking strategy with other business professionals whose current clients are your next clients. Yeah. And that by being introduced and getting there ahead of your competition, you can take a more relationship-based approach as opposed to close them now approach before the next guy gets here. And you can really move into that. In fact, in the book, I have a whole chart that talks about going from solicitor to vendor to peer to mentor and leader. So it's fascinating as you said that. It's like we've shared notes or something. And we'll have to send you a copy of the book here when we're done. But I'm of a very similar mindset that there are people out there, if you approach them properly, that would actually love the solution that you have. But oftentimes it gets spoiled in the delivery because you sound so much like a solicitor. Yeah. So much like the typical mass mailings, right? Which is what I was referencing. Of here, like ready to buy now, all cash, no, like exactly what you described, has that spammy solicitor feel, and you're showing up more as like, hey, you're like me, maybe I can help. If not now, later. Like that just takes all the defenses go down, right? The walls go down. It's like you don't feel icky, like someone's trying to like put you in a corner and have you sign something before you read it,
Exactly. That's exactly why I like the peer kind of positioning, is because a peer feels safe. It doesn't feel like there's any risk in calling this person back and just saying, hey, thanks for the letter. Sure, I'd be willing to chat about that. It feels like it's just a safe, non-threatening conversation. And so I think that's really important. And I think the other thing I just want to point out, about the content of those other typical sort of investor letters is it's very presumptuous, and it lets the cat out of the bag as to what the investor wants to see happen. So I will tell you, every time I send a letter, in the back of my head, I'm hoping like, oh, come on, off-market opportunity for acquisition with seller financing. But I'm not coming out of the gate just like spewing what I want to see happen. Even though I do really hope that's where it goes, I hold that back and I wait for the conversation to naturally go there, so that when they bring up something that's a clue or a trigger and I respond very naturally to what they just said, now we're heading in that direction of where I wanted it to go, but without kind of just being quite so overt and obvious about it and making it look like, well, here's what Jeff wants. Let's talk about what Jeff wants. It's much more about what they want.
Man, it's, I mean, you could bring in all kinds of dating analogies. I won't, to avoid being crass, but like, if you want a long-term relationship with somebody, which in this situation, as a, real estate investor, you can't come in with tactics that are more short-term. Right. And
Right.
I won't go there, but I think people can understand where I'm going here is that
Yeah.
like, you need to treat people with respect and earn their trust and before you could move to long-term relationships. So anyway, I think it's really interesting, kind of just natural human psychology works that way, right? You're really kind of aligning with how people work when they're building like a long-term trustworthy relationship that's going to end in a great transaction. Right. And so I love it. You're absolutely 100% doing it right. It makes sense why you're able to rack up rentals. So that obviously is how you're approaching, and I guess how you're finding off-market stuff, right? You're not looking for those that are already for sale. Once you get to the seller financing part, let's talk a little bit about how you're having that conversation. Because that's obviously the next, like once you get somebody that raises their hand and says, yeah, so glad you reached out, right? Fellow landlord. We are thinking about selling. How do you then transition to get into your expertise of the seller financing?
Yeah. So one thing is I like to think of myself, it's a funny analogy in a way. I like to think of myself as a doctor who's ultimately going to diagnose and then make a prescription. Now, the reason it's a funny thing is that 99% of the people who call me don't feel like the patient, right? They're not calling me because they have a problem. They're not coming in saying like my knee hurts or something like that. But I'm still approaching it like that. So I'm showing up and I'm asking questions that are kind of diagnostic questions. And then when they give me the insights I need, then I can start to make a bit of a prescription that is based on what they've told me. So I like to listen for, lots and lots and lots of clues, but especially 3 clues. Like the first one I mentioned before, which is them expressing some desire to not have a big capital gains tax bill next April. Secondly, a lot of times I'm listening for clues where they're saying, I have this rental property because I like income. If I sell it, where does their income goes away? What do I do now? And then number 3 is sometimes they'll say, we could get this lump sum of cash, but I don't really know what I would do with it. I don't need it for something real, really in particular. So when I hear any combination of those 3 clues, then it opens the door for me to make a prescription, so to speak, of, well, one thing we could consider for your benefit, seller, is this idea of an installment sale, because it sort of addresses these 2 or 3 things you just mentioned to me. And then we kind of go from there. So I really, really try to like hold back any, any inclination at all, any clue that's kind of where I want it to go. Because I'm also happy to buy properties in other ways if that's really what makes sense. But I'm listening for those clues so that when I bring up the topic that I do in my own self-interest want to bring up, it feels very responsive to their needs.
It's interesting because again, going back to this concept of moving beyond being like a solicitor, right, to someone that they trust, a peer. And I would even say what you're describing is kind of how I describe it, is you're now a mentor and a leader, right? And oftentimes to best lead people and to best mentor people, you need them to come to some sort of discovery themselves that I do have that problem, right? Before you just tell them this is what we should do.
Yeah.
Right. Then people, again, those walls go back up. But if you can lead them along, knowing that you have a prescription that will help them, assuming they have like one of these several diagnoses, excuse me, then at that point, like you said, you're able to have a natural, genuine conversation, but knowing that if these problems come up, you can solve that problem. And to me, you've really moved beyond just being a peer, excuse me, to where now you're a leader, a mentor. You're giving them knowledge that they didn't know otherwise, right? This is helping them at a higher level than they could have helped themselves, which I think is a really beautiful relationship when it's not, ooh, can I get this past them? Can I get them? But no, it's like this solves problems that they didn't realize could be solved through this transaction.
Yeah, absolutely. And to me, the key is to take on that role of leader without it being too overt, because these people are not calling me back because they feel like they need a leader. Just like I mentioned, they're not calling the doctor because they feel like they've got a symptom, but if I can still kind of do that while still feeling like a peer, now I'm providing leadership, because at some point I can say, well, good news is I've done a couple of these before. And so I can tell you a little bit about how it works. I can answer some of your questions. I can point you in the right direction to have other questions answered. Here's some of the things that have come up before. And now I am playing the role of leader, but without them feeling like that. And just to kind of go back to like the normal real estate investor marketing dynamic, right? If you put up a sign on the side of the road that says "We buy houses," or you even send out a letter that says "I like to buy houses fast, cash," all that, the person who responds to that is effectively raising their hand and saying, "Hey, I'm in a tough spot here. I need somebody to bail me out." So the very first opening dynamic there is one of like, a disparity of leverage and power, and like one person's in a bind and the other person shows up as the hero. And I don't like that. I don't want there to be that disparity. I want there from the very beginning to feel like we're already on equal footing, and we're going to continue to be on equal footing throughout the conversation.
Yeah. I love it. It really aligns with, I think, the first personal development book, the first of I don't know how many that I really fell in love with, was Stephen Covey's 7 Habits of Effective People, right?
Yeah.
And it was either win-win or no deal. And I feel like the way you're coming at this, Jeff, not only produces great results for you, but also creates great results for them and creates a long-term sustainable business. You don't create a reputation of like, oh, that guy, like, he just comes in and is like a vulture, right? Feeding on people that are in bad situations. Now, again, there's some people that come in and offer real solutions, but the people that you're looking for aren't in that spot, right? Therefore, you could never have the reputation. And all along the way, it really creates a win-win, and is not just seeking for those super desperate people. I love it. It's great.
Yeah.
Let's talk a little bit now. Obviously, we've talked a little bit about, finding these kind of off-market opportunities, the relationship-based methodology. Once you get in there, how to start to open up the door to seller financing. Is there anything else that you would add in here, Jeff, that people need to know as kind of some foundational principles for racking up rentals, right? For really being a thoughtful real estate investor. That is something that we haven't touched on yet that would be interesting.
Well, I don't know if it's something different, but I think it's like an important elaboration kind of on this a little bit. Is I have found that investors by and large have a mentality that says, I need to get leads. And once I have leads, that's all that matters. And then from there on out, the rest of the process is the same. And I would argue that the way you generate a lead actually has a huge impact on how everything else is going to go later. And so here's why I bring this up. I just think it's important that if somebody says, I want to try this, that they're also not sort of saying, well, I'll also get on a bunch of wholesalers lists, and I'll also look at a bunch of listed properties. Because to me, all of those things, like the way that name and phone number and address shows up on your sheet of paper, has a huge impact on where the whole thing is going. And actually, it's funny, kind of back to your mention or your reference of a dating analogy. I've thought about this before, and I've said, let's say that you are looking for that perfect partner, and you say, I need 10 leads, right? And you just get 10 names on your list. Well, if there's 10 names on your list, and 2 of them came from Craigslist, relationship ad, 3 came from a dating app, 3 were scratched on the bathroom stall at the rest area, and then 2 or 3 were like referrals from your closest friends. Like don't try to pretend that all of those leads are created equal, right? So I guess my point with this, Justin, is actually that it's not, what we're talking about is not really just a lead generation strategy. It's really like the way that you generate the lead creates benefits all the way to closing and even beyond closing, because there are things that you might want to do with the seller in terms of buying other properties in the future, in terms of even adjustments to your promissory note or your collateral agreement that you might want to make after closing, that you've been like setting the stage for all of that good stuff from the moment you started marketing to them. So I just think I find it to be a slippery slope where people say, well, this is just a way of generating leads, and so as long as they call me, then I'll just handle it the way I handle it from here on out. And I think of this as really a holistic end-to-end kind of an approach. That's not just about, I generate leads by sending people nice letters. It really starts with that kind of, but then it goes all the way through a lifetime of relationship with them.
I talk about in my book how the door through which you walk into somebody's life is very indicative of how the rest of the relationship is going to go. So if people find you, for example, as a real estate agent on through, an online lead, and it's very easy through one of these big portals to then just move on to the next person, you become a commodity, right? You've shown up into their world as a commodity, very easy to replace. A very similar principle that you're teaching here, right? Is it when you walk through the door, what I teach again is through kind of professional based referrals that people respect you and treat you better. And I hear you having a very similar, like the way you walk into their life, right? Whether through more of a spammy solicitation with the end of like, everybody fits in this box and we kind of McDonald's it, right? Where it's just, this is how it works, versus let's really take care of the relationship here. Let's have higher quality leads, even referrals. And then let's treat them in a way that's really best suits them. And we have all kinds of options to help accommodate that. I love it. Very holistic, and I believe a long-term sustainable way to build a great real estate business. Again, I can see why you're having lots of success. Love what you're having, what you're doing here, Jeff. Let's move to now the signature question of the show, which is this: you're a big thinker. You're helping a lot of other people build passive income. And I'm excited about that. I'm excited to continue to learn from you. What does Jeff Stevens do to continue to be a big thinker, to continue to expand your own personal possibilities? What does that look like for you?
Yeah, it's such a great question. I have for a very long time believed in, I guess, what I call like multidisciplinary thinking and learning. So I really think that the best lessons we tend to learn in our own space can and should come from lessons we see in different contexts. And so here's what I mean. I think that when we're just just laser focused studying real estate all the time, we see everything through this real estate lens. Everything kind of comes to us in the context of real estate. It's easy to kind of just see things in sort of a one-dimensional way, because that's just what we're surrounded by. But I love the idea of, you might read a book that says like, oh, here's what they're doing in manufacturing. And if you can figure out what they're doing, like the principle behind what they're doing in this manufacturing case study, for instance, just making that up, and then you see what is the principle behind that, and then how does that principle, like contextually, it's completely different, right? But the principle behind it, when I translate it into my own space, now that, to me, that creates innovative thinking and thinking bigger. So when I was still just a part-time real estate investor, I had a marketing and branding agency for about 10 or 12 years. And I really think that, although I didn't, really realize it at the time, the types of conversations I would have with my clients there, the sales process I would use to bring on those consulting clients, all has really informed how I do things now, because I learned it in a different context. And so I love to read and listen and get coaching programs that are not specifically about real estate, for instance. I get a ton out of that kind of stuff, because part of the benefit is figuring out how to take what you hear, understand the principle behind it, and then translate it into your space and figure out how to apply it.
It's fascinating. Sometimes I do hear people in the real estate world saying, well, if that person has never been a real estate agent, then you have nothing to learn from them. I'm like, okay, so you're telling me if Steve Jobs were here, you'd have nothing to learn from him. Jeff Bezos, nothing to learn from him, right? And now that's an extreme example. But the point is, who is succeeding in business, and how do we apply those fundamental principles and lessons to our business? And I think, again, that opens you up to not be a commodity. When all you do is learn from people that are your competitors in your sphere, it gets hard to really stand out. It gets hard to do anything different. The fact that you took knowledge from previous branding and marketing, obviously, I've seen that through, again, your correspondence with your email list, through social media, and it very much shows. So I agree. I think it's great advice, is that you can learn from anybody that's creating success. And in fact, you may even accelerate your success, because you're not going to be implementing the same tactics and strategies that everybody is, right? Following the same people. Yeah,
exactly. I mean, it's probably an unpopular thing to say, but I kind of think like best practices it's a little bit of a slippery slope, because,
right,
like, why recreate the wheel every time when somebody else can say, like, here's the best way to do this? But it's also a little dangerous, because now you're just sort of thinking the same way as everybody else. And so I think there has to be a balance there between understanding best practices from people who know your space inside and out, but also going outside and saying, well, how can we apply what we're seeing in different contexts?
Great stuff, Jeff. Really enjoyed the conversation. I just put, for everybody watching here live, you can actually click on the link to get this really interesting guide that Jeff has spoken about, really how to get you started with everything we've discussed today. If you go to rentalwealthguide.com, you can find it. If you're listening to the podcast after the fact, I would encourage you to, again, go to rentalwealthguide.com. A great place to go to get started. Jeff, been such a pleasure. Thank you for your time and expertise, everything you're sharing here. And
Thank you.
look forward to having you back at some point. And for everybody listening here today, my final request are these 3 simple words, and they are go think bigger. Jeff, thanks for helping us do that today, my friend.
Thank you, Justin.